everybody. Welcome to Thursday's Let's Do Lunch. It's great to have the show back and active into our second season, now to our fourth day of season 2 of Let's Do Lunch, where we talk about the business of media, entertainment, games, rights tech, music, so many great topics we cover here throughout the week. Before I introduce our speakers today, let me remind you that we encourage you to introduce yourselves. We love to hear who's in the room. So when you go to the chat on the bottom nav, please make sure to select the drop down for all panelists and attendees so everybody can see your intros. And intro away. We'd love to know what you're up to. Feel free to drop links in as well if you want to put in your LinkedIn or something about yourself. Also, if you have questions for the panel, please put them in the Q&A area just to the left of the chat so that our moderator can easily see your questions. Today we have a great, interesting topic. I'll let our moderator introduce the topic, but we have David Chavern, who is President and CEO of the News Media Alliance, and he'll be joined by our moderator, Paul Sweeting. Paul is CEO of Concurrent Media and editor-publisher of the RightsTech Project. Welcome, Paul. You're on mute, Paul. You're on mute.
That's like so 2020.
Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you again, Ned, and hello, everyone. It's great to be back here at the RightsTech Roundtable and Let's Do Lunch. We have what I think is going to be a very interesting conversation for you today, but before we get to that, I just wanted to go over the usual couple of headlines of recent developments in the world of rights tech. First off, in the last couple of weeks, there's been an enormous and somewhat puzzling explosion in NFTs, non-fungible tokens, being released by artists, musicians, and others. Just this week, Grimes, recording artist, issued some artwork of hers as an NFT. It was a series of artworks that she released, and she generated $6 million in revenue from the sale of those works. Mike Shinoda of Linkin Park sold one piece of art, original art, via NFT for $30,000. The EDM artist Blau sold just this past weekend, sold an album, a crypto album, a tokenized album, I guess would be the way to best describe it, in limited edition, and he sold $11.6 million worth of his tokenized album. And tomorrow, the first band, Kings of Leon, are planning to release their own crypto album. Also in the art world, the video artist who calls himself Beeple sold a 10-second video clip for $6.6 million as an NFT. There have been, this week, saw an announcement from a token exchange called Super Rare, partnering with a company that has appeared at RightsTech events in the past, Verizart, which runs a blockchain-based authentication service that they're going to be staging a series of 10 NFT auctions, artwork auctions, over the next 10 weeks. I'm not quite sure what to make of this sudden, all of this sudden activity, but it's something I hope to explore further here at future RightsTech Roundtables. The other, of course, big story recently has been the sort of historic move by the Australian government to impose a what they call a media bargaining code, which would require technology platforms such as Facebook, Google, and others to negotiate a payment system with Australian publishers. And if those negotiations do not reach an agreement, there would be a mandatory arbitration proceeding in which an arbiter under the auspices of the Australian government would establish what the payment would be. Facebook, of course, flipped out over this, and so did Google. Google initially threatened to pull out of Australia altogether. They ultimately backed off on that threat. Facebook actually did effectively pull out of Australia in that it cut off access to all news content within Australia. And unfortunately, they also swept up a lot of non-news content in the blackout, and there was quite a kerfuffle over it. And eventually, a few days later, Facebook backed down in a sense that they restored access to news content there after the government made some changes in the bargaining code that it appears will allow Facebook to avoid the mandatory arbitration process, which seems to have been their biggest concern. Nonetheless, this has set off or has added to momentum around the idea of forcing, compelling, cajoling, coercing technology platforms to begin licensing and paying for news content that they host, display, or link to on their platforms. There was a lot of interest in this topic in Europe, where the countries within the European Union are in the process of implementing the European Copyright Directive, which includes a provision known as Article 15 that would require online service providers to secure licenses from publishers to include their content. It doesn't necessarily require payment, although that's clearly the idea. Canada is now looking at something similar. Here in the US, the House Antitrust Subcommittee is holding a hearing next week that will also look at this issue from the perspective of competition law, and the bill that they'll be considering includes a provision that would allow news publishers to negotiate collectively with platforms. There's also been an interesting move by Microsoft, who was not directly implicated in the Australian situation, but they've been very outspoken in their support for the concept behind the Australian code and other measures. They actually released a joint statement with a number of European news associations, trade associations, organizations, and they are advocating something similar in the US. What exactly their angle is on all this is not, there's obviously been speculation about it, but it's not 100% clear. But at any rate, to discuss all of this, we have, I think, the perfect guest, and I'd like to invite David to join us. Are you there, David? Ah, there he is.
There I am.
David Chavern is the president and CEO of the News Media Alliance, which is the largest trade association for the news media industry here in the U.S. It represents the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Washington Post, and other major publishers. He joined the Alliance in October of 2015, undertook a sort of repositioning, rebranding of the organization. And he's been focused on telling what he believes is an optimistic story about the news industry going forward. Prior to the News Media Alliance, he spent the better part of a decade at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. His final position there was he was the president of the Center for Advanced Technology and Innovation at the Chamber. Welcome, David.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I'm always happy to talk about news.
So, first of all, did I summarize what's going on accurately in your view? Is that are we?
Yeah, I mean, I put it in a very large context, which is I do believe, and I actually do believe this, that we're in a historic moment, akin to, by the way, what music was in 100 years ago, or TV was in the 1990s, where there's been a major disruption of distribution and a new value chain created for the content. And you need to develop systems to return value back to the creators. You know, as I'm sure the attendees on this webinar know better than I, you know, music was a print business, and music licensing was a response to recording devices, right? I think the first license was attached to player piano rolls, right? It was the means by which you return value back in a highly distributed system. Similarly with TV in the 1990s, cable took over distribution away from broadcast, and retransmission was negotiated over 10 years as a means of returning value back. And we're in a very similar moment where we lost control of the distribution of our content. We need a new system to return value back from the digital ecosystem, or frankly, we won't have journalism. But you know, we also provide huge amounts of value into the ecosystem. So it's a fair trade, but we're in that pretty creative moment of creating the new systems for valuing content and returning that value back.
And specifically with respect to the Australian model, do you see a necessary role for governments to force this new paradigm to come about, or is this something better left to the private sector to work out?
Yeah, it's interesting. You had mentioned both Europe and Australia, and I think particularly for this audience might be interesting. You know, Europe pursued a copyright theory of the case. As you noted, they created a new copyright around news, and then there's been tumult about the negotiations around the value of that copyright and ultimately payments from the distributors to the creators. Australia pursued more of a competition theory, meaning there are essentially two companies that control the distribution of the content, and they have disproportionate dominance, or they have dominance over the content creators, and there need to be a structured way to essentially force them to value the content and return that value back. And I do think, you know, where we started here in the US was a very simple request, which is an antitrust exemption to allow news publishers to collectively negotiate with the platforms. You know, very perversely, the current antitrust laws protect Google and Facebook from us. You know, we're not legally allowed to collectively negotiate with them. And you have to start with essentially these government allowances, legal allowances for you to collectively act and develop these systems But I remain of the view that the systems shouldn't necessarily be run by the government, but they have to be authorized by the government. And that's what we'll be talking about next week in the House.
How much of this has to do with the fact that Facebook and Google basically control the buy and the sell side of the digital advertising market? Isn't that fundamentally the real problem here, rather than the value of, you know, what the monetary value of the content would be?
Well, they do. I mean, there are a couple of trends, right? Which is there was a huge market shift towards targeted advertising, and targeted advertising favors the people with the most data, and they have the most data, so they are net winners in the targeted advertising market, and that's just a market change, right? And then there's the thing you noted, which is Google in particular has this utterly dominant position in that new market and controlling the buy side, the sell side, and the exchanges in the middle. And that does constrain all sorts of advertising related revenue, not just for news publishers, but for everybody else. But what we come down to is our content is high engagement content that also has high importance. We drive a lot of audience to Google and Facebook products. There's a reason, by the way, why in Google search, there's a special tab for news, right? I mean, people are interested in news and they keep coming back for it. Secondly, we also solve a problem for the platforms in that we are part of the answer to their misinformation dilemmas, right? The line I always use is, hey, if you've got a fake news problem, guess what? We're in the real news business. Like we're helping to solve their problems. And we are not getting value back from either the engagement we provide or the antidotes to their problems that we provide. There's an independent value to the content that isn't being recognized, and not enough of that is being returned to news publishers. And that is in addition to the fact that it's incredibly hard to build an advertising-based business for anyone, anywhere in the ecosystem.
So you mentioned that there's a kind of a distinction between the Australian approach and the European approach, that the Europeans took a kind of copyright-centric approach, and the Australians took a more competition-focused approach. Do you see one as being preferable to the other? I mean, is there what is your organization advocating? A European approach or Australian approach?
Yeah, I think the marketplace, because you have a very small handful of dominant companies, the parallels are much closer to competition points of view, right? And again, if you think about the US, again, music is a copyright embedded idea, right? There's gonna be these rights that could have a vast array of counterparties that pay for access to those rights. Google and Facebook, as you know, pay to license music. I don't think they pay you guys enough, but they, whereas say TV retrans in the US was a competition-based idea, right? There's a cable company in the neighborhood that controls access, and they have to deal fairly with the content creators. We think, and what we've been talking about is a model based in understanding the dominance of a handful of companies and their obligation to treat content creators fairly. And because they haven't been doing that, they're going to have to be required to do that, and at least recognize our capacity to negotiate for ourselves and have dispute resolution if there's dispute over the value of our content.
So let's say this momentum continues, and you have some success here in the U.S. and the Europeans, force something like what the Australians did. How do you? I mean, this would be a huge change in in how the news ecosystem works. How do you see? If there were a requirement in a large number of territories for some sort of licensing of news content by platforms, How do you see that working? I mean, would we need a new collective management organization to collect and distribute payments? Or do you see individual publishers, at least large ones, making direct deals with platforms? I mean, there's no ASCAP or BMI for the news business right now, right?
People have pitched that to me a lot, by the way. I forget. There's a lot of people interested in that business. Just FYI, I anticipate that the larger news, I'll say publishers, but we're in a digital space, so it's multiple kind of formats. But the largest news organizations will have the interest and capacity to get their own arrangements with the platforms. What you're looking at is really the bulk of the news industry, which is small local publishers, niche publishers on the edge of the system, that really their only hope to have any say in the valuation of their content is collective action, right? And we anticipate the formation of one, maybe multiple negotiating groups for the small local publishers who will come to a negotiated outcomes about how you value whether the metrics for valuing content, and how that value is returned, but also things like data, brand presentation, algorithms. Interestingly, what the Australian model got into all of those other things too, including how the news content is treated by the algorithms. So it would be multifaceted negotiation, but I would think there'll be a handful, let's say, of people representing small and local publishers coming to a deal that equitably values all aspects of the content. But the larger publishers will probably get their own thing, and that's the way.
And in the collective context, how would the money be paid out? Do you envision some sort of per click payment, a market share based payment? How do you envision something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting because news is different than other kinds of content. Essentially the metric for music is reach, popularity, right? The value expands as your popularity expands. News is interesting in that there could be critically and super valuable content that is geographically constrained. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a city of 25,000 people and you're doing critical journalism about with corruption or public safety or racial justice, that really is only, it'll max out as of an audience of 25,000, right? So we're really looking at it as kind of two levels. One, what are some core value, core baseline for hiring professional reporters in these communities, and then essentially a popularity thing on top of that you're obviously going to get more value if it reaches an extended part of the population. So it's going to be its own formula with its own compromises, but all of these systems have compromises. If you were back in 1915 and somebody said invent a music licensing system, something tells me they wouldn't have invented this one, but this was the one that was developed, and that, by the way, has sustained the industry for 100 years, and including through the internet disruption. So
yeah, so though a good part of the music system is regulated. Either there are consent decrees that still govern ASCAP and BMI. Rates are set by the CRB. I can't imagine the news industry would want to follow that path. folks in the music industry right now are trying very hard to get out from under most of that regulation.
Yeah. So, and I don't think you need to go there. I think you have to start with basics, man. Just again, listen, until about 20 years ago, this is an industry that had the most direct relationship you can have with a customer, right? We created a physical product and we walked it up your driveway and handed it to you when you're in your bathrobe, right? And by the way, there aren't that many businesses that do that, right? The guys who sell you tires don't roll them up the driveway.
My first exposure to the news industry was delivering an afternoon paper after school, and I hated the part where you had to go up and collect.
Yes, but so it's been this 0 to 60 jump to where you went from a highly controlled and constrained distribution system that we owned. And by the way, if you ever get to have a business where you control your own distribution, that's good. But that is not the world here. This is a world in which now there are a handful of companies that stand between us and our customers. And we need solutions that allow us to stand up for ourselves. I call Google and Facebook our regulators. The government can't regulate us, but they can. They determine how our content is viewed, where it's viewed, how it's monetized. And we need a collective capacity to get value back returned from that. And it's going to be unique to news, right? Because it is a different kind of content. But if you don't do it, if we just let the system play out, then most of the local news ecosystem is going to be wiped off the map. And by the way, there won't be new entrants. People like to get excited about the idea of new entrants in news. There should be a lot of new entrants in news, but there won't be any if the system doesn't compensate you for your work.
Just a reminder to folks out there, if you do have questions for David or for me, put them in the Q&A space there, and we'll get to them toward the end. So just to play devil's advocate for a minute,
Sure.
I'm sure you've heard the sort of counter argument that these platforms send your members a tremendous amount of traffic. And so in a sense, they're returning value to you now. Why should they, in effect, also pay you for the benefit that they're already providing by sending you the traffic?
So first, there's a tremendous amount of no-click traffic and engagement with news, right? So this gets into the whole snippets argument, but it's not just snippets. There are other presentations where people go online to get information, news-related information, and don't click through. They're just willing to consume the little summary that is created. And so the traffic is less than you think it is. The value of that traffic is much less than you think it is. And that of course, even if people do click through and go to your site, this gets to your ad ecosystem thing. Again, the platforms control the monetization there to a large degree.
Yeah.
And it becomes a kind of maybe low value marketing opportunity, but I'm allowed, by the way, to then ask about the value we're providing them for people going to their products to consume information we've created and not click through or not provided any return. I mean, I'm allowed to ask that be valued as well. And the current system, that's just assumed away, right? And so I want that valued. And then if they return real value, I'm willing to look at that, but I want an honest idea about that valuation. The estimates you hear from Google and Facebook about the value of this golden traffic are just absurd. So I'm perfectly willing to talk about a real value exchange as long as it goes both ways and it's a genuine value exchange.
It's not entirely dissimilar from the debate, long-running debate in the music industry around the so-called value gap, in that the in a sense, platforms like YouTube were built by content created by others that for a long time wasn't compensated at all, and to the extent it is now, the creators don't think it's enough. So, but the whole question of the value exchange and who's really contributing and how, and is value going back and forth, or is it entirely a one-way street? We haven't really sorted it out in the music industry.
Yeah, and what I'm just coming into the party and say we got to sort it out for us too, because the traffic, I'm talking about professional journalism. I was actually on a panel one time where somebody was talking, they represent artists of a different type. I don't want to say who, because then you'll figure out who was talking, but they said, well, their clients, these artists, would likely continue to practice their art even if they weren't getting paid, right? And I was like, well, that's awful, right? You're allowed to, if you create art, you're allowed to get value for that and pay your mortgage and the rest. But I said, let's also be very clear that there's no such thing as a free news business, right? The reporters, information may want to be free, but reporters got to be paid. So there is this kind of content has to get a value return, otherwise it just won't exist. And we just need the distributors of this of the content to acknowledge that and return appropriate value back. Interestingly, you look at other industries that have been disrupted, the overused term. This isn't Kodak in film, right? People didn't want film anymore. And that was disruptive for them and in terrible ways they couldn't get out of. We've had a distribution disruption, but the core product is actually more popular than ever, right? We have more people are consuming more hard news than ever, period. So the audience is way up here. The finances are way down here. And we got to connect more of that gap. The product we make, people want more than ever.
Switching subjects a little bit. So as I mentioned at the top, Microsoft has been very outspoken on this. Brad Smith, their president, posted a long blog post just a couple of weeks ago, endorsing the Australian bargaining code and urging the governments in Europe and here in the U.S. to take similar steps. They put out those statements in conjunction with or in partnership with various news media associations in Europe. Have you, first of all, how do you read their interest in this topic?
Oh, I think it's genuine. I mean, there's a couple parts to this. Brad Smith is a pretty deep thinker about a lot of issues. If you haven't read Tools and Weapons, I would highly recommend it. He's he's a thoughtful guy about technology.
I can see the Grant biography.
Yeah. Here, Brad Smith, Tools and Weapons. So I think he genuinely thinks about the role of technology in society and what we need to do to sustain society. And by the way, news is a type of content that sustains society, and without it, civic society starts to tear itself apart. If you want to see the impact of misinformation in society, January 6th was a perfect example of what a low quality information society looks like. So actually, I think that part is genuine, and he and the company expresses a genuine interest in journalism, not only continuing but sustaining. They also have a search engine, which they understand that people go to that search engine to get news about the world, and I'm sure they want more people to go to that search engine. That's also okay. I think they've come into this as a responsible player, and I applaud them for it.
Now, have you had any interaction with them along the lines of what your European counterparts have had? Are you coordinating anything with Microsoft?
No, I mean, no, no, not particularly. No, I mean, they're, I'm trying to think if we sent them some background information on what we're doing here, but it's not very low level communication for, so no, we're certainly not coordinating in any sense.
Now, as we mentioned, next week, the House Antitrust Committee, under, I guess this is a David Cicilline initiative.
Mm-hmm.
He's the chair of that subcommittee. First of all, are you testifying at that hearing? I noticed you testified at some previous hearings on this topic.
Yeah, the invitations haven't been sent out, but I think there would certainly be a chance that I would be invited, and I would be happy to testify. And then, and what I would testify a lot what we're talking about here, which is, the vast majority of the news ecosystem needs the ability to collectively negotiate and get value back. And we need a structured system that allows them to do that, and dispute resolution if it doesn't work out. And all of that, though, is based in this core authorization from Congress to allow us to collectively act. Without the capacity to collectively act, it is impossible for most of the publishing industry to try to get higher value for their content, and so that has to be first and foremost addressed. And so, yeah, I hope I'll be testifying, and I'm happy to do that.
And the bill, just to be clear, that is on the table here, it's called the Journalism
Competition and Preservation Act. And there was it was introduced in the last Congress. Our primary sponsors there were David Cicilline and Doug Collins in the House, and Senator Klobuchar, Senator Kennedy, and Senator McConnell in the Senate.
So you're getting bipartisan support.
Yeah. And we anticipate that bill, that's a very simple idea, again, just allow collective negotiation, and that bill will be introduced very shortly. And then we're going to have the hearing will really be talking about what more could be added to it in terms of negotiating structure and dispute resolution.
Okay, we're coming up on time here. We do have some questions, but before we get to those, Laura, could you throw up the poll? I suppose I could throw, oh, there it is. So we have just a quick little poll here to give folks a chance to weigh in on some of what we've been talking about. And while you're filling out that poll, let's take some questions from the audience. Judy Havas asks, is there a role for the ultimate consumer reader to weigh in on this dilemma, or not enough interest because the average person just wants something for free and doesn't care about the dynamics of where it comes from or how it gets?
Yeah, probably a little of both. I mean, I think what people don't appreciate is most news content that they consume online is still heavily subsidized by old economy business models, meaning for a lot of my members, they still get a lot of revenue from their declining print business, right? So the declining print business pays the bills, and that they make the content available online with low remuneration, right? Low value back. Similarly, by the way, with video news content, TV news content, that's paid for by the broadcast business models, and they get relatively little money from the digital space. What you have to worry about is, like print, by the way, is we're on a runway to where that goes to the end, and that we will have to make a living off the digital space, and we currently can't do that. Now, the role for the consumer ultimately is, we are trying to get at that mass of news content that's delivered through the platforms that people pick up pieces of. There's a huge role for people to be subscribers to publications that they really care a lot about and really value in depth. And that will likely be the dominant revenue stream for news publishing going into the future, right? Now, if you make it all subscription, people also like to complain about paywalls, weirdly. They don't like any answer other than, so if you have a future that's only subscription, then that is a heavily paywalled future where most people are left out. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Elena Bailey asks, value creation is done on the internet. Do internet companies need licenses to show that content? Question mark. Just wondering about the difference between news or information shared and created on the internet versus a platform like Facebook on the internet sharing information.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this gets in, what I'm talking about is professional journalism. Journalism's created by people who are paid to create that professional journalism, and then how is that distributed and how's the value brought back? I think you can draw analogies immediately to the music business as well. There's content out there for which you require licenses and you want compensation. I'm sure there's also lots of free expression of music content that people
Our whole
don't.
Platforms built on it, like SoundCloud.
Yeah, and that's fine. That is, there should be no constraint on people's expression. What we're talking about is people are paid to do the process of journalism and create news content. And how is that content treated online, and how is the value returned?
And of course, it's not just reporters. I mean, having come out of the news business myself, I mean, there's the whole infrastructure of editing, yeah, and fact verification and so forth that is not seen by the reader, but
absolutely, yeah,
it's where a lot of the cost base is on the editorial creation side.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the interesting things about Substack. And by the way, I'm a big Substack subscriber. I consume a lot of Substack content, but there's obviously going to be a role for individual expressions and individual work. But that a news publishing organization is not just that; it's also editors, lawyers, HR, the whole mass of things.
Photographers, graphic designers.
And by videographers,
yeah,
audio people that create a sustained business around delivery of critical journalism.
An anonymous attendee for David. It's not always easy to say what news content is and what it is not. That's true. Do you foresee a situation in which organizations would have to qualify as legitimate news providers to be eligible for compensation from the platforms? I'd hate to see a lot of money go to clickbait platforms.
Yeah, I was actually on a long call last night just about this. It's a difficult problem because it's novel. I mean, again, if you look at the parallels, music is essentially an opt-in system, right? I think you get to call yourself a musician. It may not be a very good one, but you get to essentially opt into this.
There's no professional licensing.
Yeah. On the other side, like if you look at TV retrans, that's based in a federal license, right? Does the broadcaster have a license to broadcast, right? And so, there are some pre-existing bills. There's a shield law bill out there about protecting journalists that gets it defining who journalists are. We're working on approaches where you...
sorry to interrupt, but to me, my concern there is that could raise all kinds of First Amendment.
Oh, absolutely. Issues. Absolutely. But
I don't know that I want the government deciding who is and is not a journalist.
I don't want that either. What I'm trying to get at is starting to, in particular, what I'm trying to get a handle on is some understanding of what professional journalism is, right? People who do that as a living and get paid to do that. right? And but it's a hard problem. But you know who does this all the time, by the way, are Google and Facebook. They their algorithms make huge amounts of decisions about what's news and what isn't.
Yeah.
And you know what shows up in the Google News tab, by the way. I didn't decide that, and you didn't decide that. So it's a difficult problem, and there's not going to be perfect answers. I do think it's ultimately a solvable problem if you are trying to focus on who's creating professional journalism content. But it's not an easy problem to solve. But if we don't solve it, then you're essentially just wiping a whole content category off the map.
Patty Jones, a regular at the RightsTech Roundtable. How are you, Patty? What do you think about the quality of the news content? Hasn't its quality been degraded because of the options and dissemination? I hear complaints from PR colleagues that college interns are writing major stories or for major newspapers. Should we be paying for substandard quality?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, there is. I mean, in some cases, it's AI algorithms that are writing some stories.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of things I want to unpack. Interestingly, you talked about all the value we get from traffic, right? The argument is we get a lot of value from traffic. That is essentially a pro clickbait argument, right? Which is that's what the value you're supposed to be spinning up. And frankly, what the people I represent have learned is that doesn't produce stuff that people value, and it degrades the motivations in the industry. So nobody I represent is chasing clickbait, certainly not anymore. I mean, that is chasing traffic is a losing deal. Getting to this point about the financial constraints in the industry where, you know, they're saving money in a lot of different places. That's because, you know, the content is getting distributed in places where it's not returning value. So you have this continual financial constraints. What we want is for publishers who invest, get a real return, a decent, fair return on that investment. So we got to fix the marketplace, and then you get, first of all, an increasing number of journalistic voices, but also it becomes a pretty good business to invest in the creation of great journalism.
Just a funny story. I remember I was in San Antonio. I was covering an antitrust lawsuit, and there was a stringer from the New York Times sort of popping in and out, and the PR person for one of the parties in the lawsuit, after speaking with the stringer, I heard her mutter. She was sitting behind me. I heard her mutter, "God save me from 23-year-old reporters from the New York Times."
Yeah. Well, that may be an eternal challenge. I'm not sure that's not a function of internet distribution.
One last question popping in. David Taub, do you see VC smart money flowing into this space? Are there disruptive trends that excite you as a solution to the value redistribution? You mentioned earlier that people are pitching you on helping you create.
Yeah, well, let me talk about actually something I'm excited about in terms of product, which is we haven't really seen truly integrated format news products, in the sense that it's text, it's video, it's audio in very seamless ways. They, you know, the New York Times and CNN are in essentially the same business online. You know, they're, you know, it's NewYorkTimes.com, CNN.com. Just New York Times is very text forward and text heavy, and CNN is very video forward, video heavy. And what I see is actually development of really multifaceted delivery systems of news that we haven't seen how engaging they are yet. And I think, you know, we are going to fix this ecosystem for news, because otherwise it goes away. And I think when we do, you are going to see some smart money coming in, because again, the engagement is super high. The number, the audiences are bigger than ever for news. So it's not like people don't want news. They want it more than ever. We just have to have the right value supply chain, and it'll be a really interesting space, I think.
Okay, we are in fact out of time. I just want to put up the poll results here and see what we got. I was curious, how many of our audience is currently paying for news to subscribe, and I guess that qualifies as a plurality because it's not quite over 50%, but most 50% of the folks subscribe to between 1 and 3 news sources directly, either in print or digitally. And a surprisingly high number subscribe to more than 6, 22%.
This is a great news crowd. I like that.
Yeah, a news crowd. What channel would you say delivers the largest share of the news you consume? Print, a lot of print, folks. 22%, yay, print.
It actually is, I could go into this for hours. It actually is a really good product for a whole variety of reasons, but just not how people consume anymore.
But the majority get their news from the web, either directly from publishers' websites or from aggregators like Google News and others. Not much for social media or broadcast, and a little bit for audio, either radio or podcast. Should technology platforms be required to pay distributors either directly or through revenue sharing to display or enable sharing of news content? And a large majority says yes, they should.
Well, thank you.
So we got a pro publisher crowd out here. A few more say yes, but, so they maybe have some reservations about exactly how it should happen. Only 17% say no, and 11% aren't sure. So you got a friendly audience here today.
Good. Well, out there fighting. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity today. It's been great discussion, and I really enjoyed it.